Triumph of Chaos. I don't know if there's much point to me actually even reviewing this, in the sense that I got so damn much wrong and was never in a state mentally to face this game. But I can put some words into play at least before I wrap this completely, because I guess people are used to that. So, I think the first thing is I owe everybody an apology, and Hair Doctor more than anyone else. I'm sure, you took it well, but I'm sure it's not pleasant to hear someone just cursing over your game that way. I was in no mental state to face this, and I should have just put it away as soon as I realized I don't get it right now, and this was the key one, and I am not willing to put the effort in to play sort of a little trial run before I do the video. A couple of very complicated games that I've faced, Axis Empires, with new ideas behind them for me. Axis Empires, Empire of the Sun. Trying to think what else. The Lace Wars stuff. I could look at, and Carrier, I could look at it and say, I can't get this well enough to give anything of value when I start explaining the rules or start playing. All I'll be doing is cursing my head off. And I said, well, okay, I'm not going to do that. In this case, for whatever reason, I was unwilling to put that effort in to play around with it and get some feel for what the hell was going on. I'm not sure how much it would have helped given the persistence of my errors. For example, not being able... So there is a definite issue for me with the rules books. The organization, the formatting, there are rules scattered throughout them. There's the division with the political rules really, really badly placed. They've been ripped out of the rules. Section 8 of the rules has been ripped out completely, put in another booklet. Now, in and of itself, that's bad enough, but Section 8, the political rules, consists of a set of rules, a huge section that essentially is a more detailed version of these little player aid cards. And then some more rules kind of tucked in the back where I didn't even see them. And that was definitely a problem. And then also the problem of coping with trying to add everything in from the Comrade's Guide at the same time. There's no sanity here for me, right? Wasn't it hard enough of a game that I didn't have to do every... Well, if you know me, you know that that's what I tend to do. But I was in no status to do it right now. And it turns out I was also not really in a state of mind to face a CDG again. Maybe I never will be again. Okay, so... I'm talking more about me than the game here. No big surprise there. Okay. I guess part of it is there's something that I never really liked about the hard decision CDGs. Hard decision games of any kind, to tell you the truth. And this one, like Paths of Glory, you're sitting on a handful of cards and consistently, if you're me, saying, I don't know what to do. I just have no idea. Empire of the Sun did the same thing to me. And to be fair, almost any game with naval rules will do that to me. So, I had the same problem with, say, the A3 Pacific clone, Empire of the Rising Sun. I had the same problem with Whiff. It's just, some things just don't click for me. And one of those things is making that decision of, I've got so many things I want to do, feel like I should be able to do, and now I've got to choose one of them right now. And I really hate being put in that position. That makes a lot of the Euro designs tough on me. And anyway, that's where I sort of kind of fell apart at the end, was not so much, oh man, I'm not getting this anymore, but just I'm spending, an hour and a half between card plays because I don't want to face the next card play decision. I just don't want to do it. It's not pleasant to me to face that kind of thinking again and again and again. Sometimes I don't mind it, but right now I'm really despising it. I should not have, obviously, if I'd known that. Now, I had some fun yesterday. I was fiddling around and the cards were coming out quickly like they used to with the CDG, but then they just fell flat on me today, where I just felt like, geez, I don't know what I want to do. I mean, I don't want to do this. So what about the game? What can I say? Obviously, it shares the Paths of Glory core rules, although that doesn't really help me because I tried to put Paths of Glory out of my mind as much as possible. I'll say one thing, it doesn't so far upset me as much as Paths of Glory. The rules are more poorly presented. There's no question of that, but I'm not seeing anything that makes me say, oh my god, this game is just so, non-historical feeling. I'm not pulling cards where I'm playing God in this game. Every card that I played as a player, I felt like I had a right to play. And that's one of the things that really pisses me off about Paths of Glory. I do feel a little iffy about one of those core things from Paths of Glory, and I tried looking it up in Paths of Glory. Maybe I played it wrong there too. This may just be my own automatic response to what I do not like in terms of what isn't sinking into me. Or maybe it's the other way around. I don't like it, so it doesn't sink in. But you can't move into a position and attack from it. That just doesn't feel right to me. But then again, the peculiarities of the pulsing of a CDG, maybe I'm missing something there. I just feel like, especially with the kind of fluidity in the Russian Civil War, it doesn't really apply. But I don't think it really applies. So I think the rule of you can only attack from a space you already control applies to World War I nicely, more nicely than to a Russian Civil War situation. But I don't feel like that I don't feel like you shouldn't be able to pour reinforcements into a sector just before you hit it. World War I definitely is filled with instances where one or both sides are dumping additional troops in. Now, the one thing it does that's kind of nice from a player's perspective is you can see where the enemy has an attack and you can react to it. So you have this kind of seesaw balancing of play after play where, it's almost chess-like. You push a piece into place. Watch my Antietam in Their Quiet Fields 2 thing for how I feel about chess-like things, because that's how I feel McClellan was playing that, and it was horrible for that. But anyway, it feels almost chess-like in the sense that you're pushing something forward, the other player has to do something to react, then you get to do something, then the other player does something. That actually is a limitation on the chaos, and I'm not convinced that the way I was doing things worked any better. It just feels kind of funny to think about it that way. There's another piece to it which I thought was going to be very painful as well. I mean, so there was real design influence from two games on this one. Paths of Glory, which I really dislike in a number of different ways, but this doesn't seem to absorb too much of what I disliked about it. And maybe some of the card scripting. There are cards that, you know, you're holding and you say, well, I don't know what the card that depends on this is going to be like. I don't know how good it's going to be. And the other one was Days of Decision. Days of Decision, I'm opening up all these Chinese menus, looking at them, and trying to figure out what my perfect meal is, right? You're selecting from all these charts, and you have a couple of things to keep in mind. One is the diplomatic effect on all the countries, and that's important. But also many of the things that you pick have a secondary ability. Well, this game presents the same thing, but not in chart form, rather in these political card form. Somehow I found these easier to grasp in my mind, because I could take all... So in Days of Decision, I've got these charts, and I say, okay, I don't want that one, I don't want that one, oh, that one's interesting, I don't want that one, oh, that one's interesting. Okay, I have no way to sort them. With this, I had the nice little mechanical task of, okay, I don't want that one, I don't want that one, oh, this one's good, I don't want that. And then I have a little stack that I can look through of the ones that have some interest in me. That's cool. I like that a lot better, and that made my decision-making process on those a lot more effective. There's also the fact that I think, if I recall correctly, Days of Decision, you select these sequentially. One person selects theirs, then the other person selects, and it's known. In this, first of all, if you're selecting any at all, and there's a chance they could just randomly occur, which I think is very cool, the ones that you're selecting, the other player's not going to be touching the cards that you're looking at. And then you're both selecting secretly, and then you see what the responses are. Now, I don't really remember Days of Decision. You know, it's been like 15 years since I've played it. So maybe that was secret as well. But you have all this information just sitting in front of you as you're picking what you know, what the other person probably is going to be doing, and you're trying to figure that out. With this, it felt much cleaner. The decisions felt like you were optimizing along one path for the most part. I want my points in the different diplomatic functions, and then you were also not faced with the noise of what the other person might do right in front of you. You didn't have those same charts in front of you. All right. Outside of that, well, the components, man. Clash of Arms makes the most beautiful maps. I just love touching them. I'm going to say that every time I play one of the games. It pooches a little bit. I've been into that. The counters are very, very pretty, but oh boy. The sorting task involved in keeping track of everything, I was not up to that either. I wasn't even up to bagging the counters at the end of the game. I mean, but it was definitely kind of daunting to sort them out. And then I ended up throwing all the counters marked 1919 into a couple of piles, you know, one for reds and one basically for everything else. And that didn't work too well in gameplay. What I think I'd want to do is, instead of sorting these suckers all into one big bag, I think I'd want to do it. So, I mean, I have all the reds in one bag. I have all the whites in one bag, but there's multiple factions of whites. And then there's all the smaller factions. And I think I think I should have put, say, the Poles and the Germans and stuff like that, or maybe all the Central Powers, into their own little bags, just because if and when I play again, and I'll give it another shot at some point, if I live that long, it will make life a lot more controllable. Because the sorting was very difficult. It was hard to tell from the pictures necessarily what each faction was. It will be easier having played it again. The rules themselves, like I said, man, there's two ways you can do sort of bad rules. Now, I've seen bad rules that are bad on both vectors or multiple vectors. One is ambiguities, missing parts, etc. And to tell you the truth, most people would say, oh, that's the worst. To me, that's not. To me, that's okay. If I read a rule book and say, aha, this is ambiguous, well, then I make a decision. Or I go look for errata. With this one, unfortunately, I think there were a couple places where I'm pretty sure there were some slight ambiguities. There were no contradictions I could find, I think. But the overall formatting was not conducive to my learning. But much, much worse is sort of the sense of structure and organization that was placed over the rules. Very little here. Now, there are rule books that I have had humongous trouble with. Let's say Axis Empires. That I found an almost impossible rule book to cope with. I didn't get the information that I wanted towards the game from it. However, I can look at it and say, I understand the philosophy behind this. It is organized in a very rigid and effective manner if I could cope with it. Unfortunately, that is the manner that cookbooks are organized in. Do this, do that, do the other. This game is not organized like that. This game is barely organized, in my opinion, in terms of the rules. First of all, obviously, there's that splitting of the sections, but let's go beyond that. You know, when I was trying to fit the errata in, the errata are poorly defined as for a change list. Now, I'm glad to see there is a change list here, but part of the problem is just quite simply there aren't enough case numbers to insert errata easily. You know, but also there are places where it feels like I'm not sure if I'm at the top heading in the rules or somewhere else. There are things stuck in the miscellaneous. There's a tendency not to duplicate rules, which can be good if the organization is very strong, but it helps maintain the rules too. But in this case, there's this miscellaneous rules, but sometimes things you feel should be miscellaneous rules are embedded in the main rules. Now, I shouldn't be one to complain about this because EU, and I think to some extent faces this. One nice thing about EU, though, is it's got enough ambiguities and mistakes, etc. in it that whatever I think I'm doing is right enough. It's close enough for government work. Unfortunately, with this, I think the rules are actually correct, and that actually brings up something that Herr Doctor mentioned in one of his replies to my troubles, which was that he got playtesters, I think, from Don Greenwood for this. Now, Don Greenwood is not the person I would go to look for blind testers. I mean, you know, this is the guy who's responsible in the end for Struggle of Nations coming out with the rules that it did, which, okay, but presumably he's giving you good play testers, good blind testers. I'm sure whoever okayed Struggle of Nations was not on his short list. But if you think about what Greenwood published, especially later in Avalon Hill's period, when you think about things like Geronimo, Republic of Rome, great game, the rules were incomprehensible and poorly organized. However, I think they were blind tested to the sense of or play tested or whatever, to the sense of make sure everything's here. So my guess is his good blind testers were people who could cope with really, really difficult organizational formatting on rules and make sure that there were no ambiguities and no omissions. Now, that's not what my goal would be for rules. My goal for rules, obviously, is perfection, but I would certainly put forth first, let's get the organization so it's understandable, easily comprehensible, so that it's digestible by the average rules reader. It doesn't matter if you get everything right. And actually, Mark Herman, for example, is very good at nailing every damn thing down, but I feel like he gets too verbose and actually is more difficult for me to understand than, say, Richard Berg, who doesn't bother nailing much down, but comes across usually with the main gist of the game, so that, you understand enough that you can fill in the gaps for yourself. And that divides into two types of players, which is the person who wants to focus and really pay attention to one game and play it for competitive play. They need that really strong, tight rule set, and they don't mind if it's a little harder to learn because of it. And that's what I think that largely Mark Herman constructs a lot of his games towards. On the other hand, more my style of play is, I'm looking to get the game on the table and play it reasonably. And I don't really give a shit if I get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. In fact, I'm probably happier if I don't. Unfortunately, CDGs usually, they seem a little less resilient than some games in terms of getting rules wrong, but I don't know. This one, I can't tell. I don't think that my misplaying of rules was honestly that huge a factor, although one big one, which was the move in combat one. If you move into a space, you can't move into and end your turn in a space that's got a combat marker in it, which means you can't move and then attack. Given that, I was able to see a much, much more mobile and fluid war, which meant that when white got screwed, they got screwed hard. I wouldn't mind that if this was a hex encounter game. Somehow it bugged me, a more traditional hex encounter, no CDG type aspect. Somehow, when things fall apart for CDGs, for me, they fall apart worse. That's the point-to-point movement is always a headache for me, and that if there's any one thing that broke my line and probably my morale overall, it's just facing a point-to-point game. And honestly, this, like many, beautiful map to look at. Difficult sometimes to discern what's a line, what's not. These rivers, they add to the visual appeal. They also add to the confusion. It feels like I should be able to move down them. A lot of stuff like that. But that's the nature of most CDGs. They tend to be point-to-point. And a good number of them tend to try to obscure the bubble map look that's really hideous to look at. But in doing so, they make the game less playable, in my opinion. At least for me. So it's not in my opinion in that case. Anyway. The one thing that I really do like about this is there is a high degree of chaos here. Some of it, unfortunately, is in the rule book, but some of it's just in what can happen. You really do not know. Your opponent's political card selections, you don't know where that's going to end up. There's a possibility it just ends up randomly coming out where neither of you have control over it based on your picks. The decks. So the early decks in the game are very, very controlled. They're very small. The first two turns, you run through the deck precisely. The third turn, you have a pretty good idea of what you're likely to get. After that, starting in 1919, that's turn 4, right? I hope so. Yeah. Starting in 1919, you add a humongous pile of cards in, and the whole thing just becomes really random. You don't know what you're getting, and you don't know whether your prior plans are going to pay off for you. Unfortunately, by that point for me, the game had already been decided. And, I don't usually quit games early, but in this case, there were two factors going there. One, it was decided. And two, it was getting very, very painful for me to make my decisions. I could have just said, and I was doing this towards the end, okay, I'll play this way, I'll play this way, I don't care. But, yeah. So I've heard this is a very long game, and certainly it would be with me taking an hour and a half on each decision. But unlike something like A Lesser Wrath, I don't feel like I have this huge scope in which little decisions allow me the time to kind of build up and make bigger decisions over the course of time. I like games to do that, and very few CDGs allow that. Usually they're more focused in on, let's get to the big decision and get to it fast, which means they're harder to learn, right? You can't kind of fiddle around a little bit to understand how to make things work. Right away you're tossed in on key decisions from the very beginning. And that makes it a little more difficult to kind of settle into the game for me. Anyway, I do question how much this is tournament sort of enabled. That high level of chaos, I don't know how appealing that is to your average tournament player. I know there are some questions about balance in it. To me, I would kind of say, wow, you'd have to play a lot of this, a real lot of this, to start coming up with, yeah, okay, I have an idea of just how balanced it is. I would say one of the problems, first of all, is you'd have to exhaust all sort of strategy. So I think it's claimed that it's still a little unbalanced in favor of red, even with the Comrade's Guide expansion. But my feeling is that it would take 5 or 10 games of this to have any real good, solid feeling for that. Because there is just so much chaos going on in it, and so many different paths you can follow, so many different choice lines that you can take. So even if you pick one and try to do it and it doesn't work, well, that doesn't mean that strategy was a bad strategy. It may have just panned out poorly for you. And it seems like there are several different ways that you can kind of follow a path there. And clearly, if you're like me and have trouble finding or getting the rules right, given their format and positioning and organization and whatnot, that's just going to make it even more impossible, because you don't know if you're playing the game right at any given time. And that's not just a matter of the core of the rules. There's a simple factor there of, there could be some special case that you miss on one playing but then catch on another, and that could make one strategy seem better in your mind than another. And that's just my reflection on it. Some people are very, very happy with the game. I don't know for me. I suspect that the kind of decision making involved in it is just too hard for my tastes. That where I might be willing to put the kind of effort to fight my way through, and I made the purchase decision to do so, another game in the Lace Wars series, for example, and I should be getting one soon. I really don't think that I want to pick up any more of these kinds of CDGs. The ones I'm happiest with, I find, are the big multiplayer, very abstracted things, or the very light Wimp game style, abstracted military two-player games. I don't really think that I like these complex beasts when it comes to the CDGs. And I mean, Paths of Glory isn't that terribly complex in terms of the rules, although I'm sure I screwed them up too. But the decision making is too hard. I feel like the decision making in Washington's War, the decision making in 30 Years' War, which is not a trivial game, and even I think in Clash of Monarchs was easier. Clash of Monarchs has a lot of rules. But when I look to things like this or Empire of the Sun or Paths of Glory, I do not like the amount of thinking that I am forced to put into. I feel like I'm shackled and just with bad decisions everywhere, nothing but. It's not a feeling that I like. I get to do that at work where I try to figure out, well, do I spend today chasing down this rabbit hole or this one? All right, anyway, I don't know how much value this review is, whether it's a review or not. I did have some moments, certainly at least a day's worth of playing that I enjoyed of it. I think I'd enjoy this more as a drinking game than anything else. And, yeah, I think playing it solitaire definitely makes it harder, and I'm beginning to more and more stray away from doing CDGs solo as well. It's just why when there are so many good games that aren't of that style. I mean, there was this desire to explore the CDGs, but I think I've kind of gotten what I need to out of them, and I don't think that I really want to do many more, look for many more. Anyway, up it goes.